relating to the number of members on the Human Services Committee.
Mm-hmm.
Another item, Human Services funding priorities, and consultant services agreements for legislative services.
Okay. These will be B, C, and D on the agenda. So we'll start off with the Auburn Community and Prevention Coalition. Please join us at the table here and welcome.
It's right here. Okay. Thanks for having me. So, my name's Jonna Chissis, and some of you know me from. You want Ashley to come up too?
Sure.
Yeah.
Come on out.
Come on.
Jonna doesn't want to be up there by herself.
She did though. She told me to stay. Either way, whatever.
All the limelight.
Right.
All the limelight.
So, yeah, we didn't rehearse this before we came here. So, some of you know me. I'm the manager of the Auburn Library, and I'm also the chairperson for the Auburn Prevention Coalition, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. So thank you for having us. We really appreciate that you taking the time to hear about our coalition. Ashley Boyd is the coalition coordinator for our coalition. She does all the heavy lifting. She's the primary contact for our coalition. She keeps us organized and keeps us on track. So about 3 years ago, Pat Bailey walked into the library and asked to talk to me about homelessness issues and other kinds of social service issues that I see working in the library. And in the course of our conversation, she invited us to come to the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Committee, Healthy Auburn 2020. At the very first meeting, I met Rhonda Larson, the Assistant Superintendent of Family Engagement and Student Success over at the Auburn School District. And Rhonda had this great opportunity that had come her way to get some grant money to do some drug and alcohol prevention work for teens in this community. And she needed to put together a group of community members in order to qualify for this grant. And so I agreed to join in her effort, as did Yolanda, and we have some other coalition members here, Kim and Daniel. We started this in April of 2016, and our first task was to put together a group involving 8 sector leaders from the community. So we got 8 people to sign on for that job, and then we had to fill out our coalition so that we would have enough people to get the work done and to maximize our community connections. So we've been working since April 2016 on this effort. Our mission statement is to reduce, prevent, and eliminate underage drug and alcohol use by engaging, educating, and empowering all members of our multicultural community. The Community Prevention and Wellness Initiative is a partnership between the state, county, school districts, and prevention coalitions like ours. And the focus is to reduce underage drinking amongst 8th and 10th graders, because that's what research has shown has the greatest impact. So that's where our focus is, and we are focused specifically on Auburn High School and Cascade Middle School. The funding for CPWI coalitions comes from the Washington State Department of Health and Social Services. And it's a very specific type of grant that has specific requirements. So the programming that we're going to bring to the community is all evidence-based, proven programming that has a track record of working. So the first step was to form our coalition. And then we, came up with a name and a logo and got some materials to get our name out there in the community. And we wrote a strategic plan. And our strategic plan puts forth how we plan to use this grant money and what impact we hope to have in the community. In order to do that, we had to do a bit of research about data. And we collected data from the state, the county, the school districts. The school districts run a survey called Healthy Youth Survey every couple of years that gets some data directly from kids about their experiences with drugs and alcohol. We also did a survey, our coalition, to the parents in the community so that we could get some feedback about where they were, what their attitudes were about drug and alcohol use in the community. We took all that data, and what we learned was that alcohol use in the past 30 days by 8th graders in the Auburn community was at 16%, and the state average was 8%. So we were about double the state average. The 30-day, this is one-time use of marijuana in the last 30 days for 10th graders was at 23%, and the state average is 17%. So our goal is to try to bring our numbers down so they're closer or even lower than state averages. A number that really shocked me and kind of concerns me is 34% of 8th graders and 42% of 10th graders have claimed that they've experienced depression in the last year. And that's depression defined by feelings of sadness or hopelessness for more than 2 weeks in the last year. Our coalition isn't designed to address depression, but we do think it's a causal factor in teen drug and alcohol use. So something to be aware of and a number to watch. One of the things our grant allows us to do is to fund the coalition coordinator position, and she has been instrumental in getting this thing off the ground and keeping it going. We also get to fund a prevention and intervention specialist position. It's a full-time position in the schools. His name's Lawrence Davis, and he's doing amazing work at both Auburn High School and Cascade Middle School. He's working one-on-one with our students, either because they've been referred to him or through self-referral. He's also put together what's called a prevention club, where it's teens who come together by choice to work on this issue of prevention. They'll be going to a state competition, and we're going to fund their travel to this competition. I'm really excited about the kids getting involved. He's also teaching a program that we're funding called Life Skills. It's a school-based program that gets to the kids directly. He's taught over 61 sessions of this so far in the schools. It's just amazing how many kids he's reaching. We also recently completed a program called Guiding Good Choices. It's a program that's geared towards parents who have kids ages 9 to 14, and it teaches them how to, skills for how to get their kids through adolescence safely. We graduated 8 families through our first round of that class, and we're going to run another one in the spring. We're really excited for that. We did give you some handouts. This Tall Cop Says Stop is an event that we're going to fund in the community. It'll be 2 events, actually. During the day, we're going to send all the school employees and teachers through this training. And then at 6:30 p.m. on May 7th, we're going to have a session of this for the community, and all members of the community are welcome. This is a really popular and engaging program that gets really large attendance when it's held in a community. So we're excited to bring him here. We have done a number of other kinds of educational initiatives, like before prom, we sent out prom postcards, educating parents about how to have conversations with their kids about drugs and alcohol surrounding prom. We're also funding some cameras at Cascade Middle School to help with environmental factors and improve safety. And we are planning some hotspot cleanup events where we hope to get groups of coalition members and kids out in parks and schools doing cleanup activities and further building our coalition. So as we go forward, we're going to continue to bring drug and alcohol prevention programs to the community, and we are going to do additional surveys so that we can attempt to measure our impact on the community and see if there's any more approaches that we can take. So thank you all very much. We really appreciate the support of the city and having Yolanda on our council, or on our coalition. It's very appreciated. Does anyone have any questions? Yes,
Member Pelosi.
Our kids went to Olympic, and back in the late 70s, I mean, there was alcohol problems then.
Yeah.
So
There she was.
this is a wonderful project. So thank you for bringing it to us.
How many members of your coalition do you have right now?
We do have the 8 sector representatives, but we have a monthly meeting, and we're having attendance of about 15 to 20 people at each meeting.
Wow, that's good.
So I think
Good
that's
turnout.
pretty good. Yeah, especially since we've been going since April 2016. Yeah, and we've maintained that.
Babe?
Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I have a 14-year-old grandson that's living with us, and he goes to Cascade, and good kid. But how would I refer him to perhaps some of these services? I mean, I'd love for him to be involved, because now it's the risk time, right, for young kids, and
It sure is.
they're going to make some choices. So, how would I engage him?
So Lawrence Davis is his prevention intervention specialist who works specifically at his school. So if he was to contact him, he could get him involved in all projects that are running at Cascade, such as the Prevention Club. If he's a 9th grader at Cascade, he probably knows Lawrence from being in his social studies classes, also doing life skills too.
Excellent.
They also, yeah, they also have youth on this board, that at the beginning, we had 2 to 3, we had senior, we had a college student, and we had a middle school student.
Yeah.
And they gave a lot of inputs on what's going on in their schools, how the kids are hiding, their drinking, and their other activities, and how they added a lot of input into this coalition. So we listened to them, and they're still involved, you know, so.
Are they gaining access to these substances from their homes and things like that?
In some cases,
primarily?
yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes, yes.
Primarily homes, and also because older siblings, we hear that a lot, that the older siblings are supplying them with the drugs or the alcohol.
Talk to the parents.
Yeah, and the parents, we hear way too often that, well, what's the problem? I sit at the dinner table and smoke marijuana with my parents at night. So that's a huge issue that we're trying to address, is getting to the parents.
Yeah.
Interesting. Councilmember Pelosi.
Ladies, I know that we have a progressive drug take-back program in Auburn. And I understand we have 6 return sites.
Correct.
So how's the coalition involved in that and getting, kids get into the parents' medicine cabinet and the refrigerator? God, we had a whole bunch of voided stuff in our refrigerator. We went through it and took it down to our police department here, where they have a take-back box container.
Yeah.
So how do you guys?
We haven't done anything specifically with that yet, but there is a national Take Back Day every year that they do, and we've talked about doing like an event to raise awareness of that. And so it is an educational opportunity that we want to do.
Parents have got to
Yeah.
pay attention to this.
I just went to a training that Seattle Children's put on, and they're actually putting out a campaign with materials where we could actually go to the pharmacies in Auburn, and they could put flyers in all the bags of the medicine talking about take backs, and we can actually fund lock boxes that the pharmacy can take home and send home with people who have narcotics also. So we're hoping they should have that up and running within the next month for us to take part in
Yeah,
real life. So we're hoping to get a part of
I
that.
worked with King County in pushing some of the bills at the beginning to our legislature to get that through. And I mean, that is so important.
It's so important, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely necessary work that people are slowly starting to get up and running and kind of moving at a faster pace as the epidemic is kind of roaring right now, so.
Well, you guys have got a big challenge, and
Definitely.
bless you for diving into this.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Any other questions? Thank you both.
Yes.
So the only thing I would add to the,
Come up. Say your name.
I'm Daniel. I'm on this committee along with Kim, but the only thing I wanted to add is along the lines of the pharmaceuticals is that several of us sit on the Blue Ribbon Panel Committee, which addresses that. So part of what happens is several of us are sitting on multiple committees, and we're trying to work on this thing here with this group and this thing here with that group. And so we may not directly be addressing the pharmaceutical part, but I know that on the Blue Ribbon Committee, we're working with Tim to figure out how we can focus on that. And then the Blue Ribbon Committee will do some of that, and I think we're going to tag along and see how we can encourage that process. So there's wider information disseminated.
Now, there's several committees out there doing similar things, so it's good to tag up with them and join in.
Yeah.
Yes, John?
Just for the benefit of the record, Reverend Daniel Miranda.
Yeah. I came into the committee because they needed a clergy person, and somebody spread the rumor that I used to be a drug and alcohol counselor. So
Keep them on the straight and narrow.
Huge asset to our coalition.
Yes, exactly.
So it's been a good process.
It has.
Thank you all, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thanks for having us.
Okay, we'll move into our agenda items here, and the first item on there is the Regional Transportation System Initiative. Briefing.
So what I'm handing out right now is they actually came out with an updated agenda for a Friday's meeting, so with some slightly different questions on it.
Thank you.
Okay, so the Regional Transportation System Initiative, lots of words. RTSI is what we call it because it's easier than repeating that multiple times. This started basically coming out of the regional planning effort and looking at what was happening in the Puget Sound region. So in the Puget Sound region, right now, we're experiencing some fairly significant growth, and we're expecting to see that growth continue through 2040, which is PSRC's targeted growth year right now. At the same time, we're seeing continuing to not meet our revenue needs for all of the local agencies within the Puget Sound region. The current shortfall that's identified in PSRC's draft T2040 update is about $40 billion in the Puget Sound region. So that's the 4-county area of Kitsap, King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. So with that, King County and Sound Cities Association said, well, we need to do something within King County, because when we looked at the detail, King County makes up about $17 billion of that shortfall. So almost half of the shortfall in the Puget Sound region is within the King County cities and jurisdictions alone as we go forward. So about a year ago, and Brian from...
started?
Yeah. Sound Cities Association can join us. So King County and Sound Cities Association said, well, we need to probably get everybody from King County together to try to look at what is the issue that we have, and what are some potential solutions that we can discuss with the legislature about how we go forward and try to meet that ever-growing need for transportation improvements within King County. And that incorporates about 39 cities along with King County. We've been also working with the state and, again, Sound Cities Association. So what we wanted to do tonight was just talk about what this initiative has been. It's been going on for about a year. There's 2 different committees that are involved. There's a technical committee that Kevin and I have been sitting in on, and then an elected committee that has met once and will be meeting again on Friday this week. To discuss kind of what's coming out of this initiative process and to discuss the next steps going forward. So we wanted to gather some feedback from the council members before going into that meeting on Friday. So there's quite a bit of information in your packet on the initiative and on the background and the details. And then there are some questions in the agenda, the draft agenda that I just handed out to you, that Mayor Backus, who will be attending the meeting on Friday, will have the pleasure of answering for the city of Auburn. So we wanted to kind of go through some of that detail. I don't know if there's anything, Brian, you want to add from SCA's perspective.
I'm just going to say, would you like to introduce your other panel member here?
Yeah. So Brian Perry with SCA is the policy analyst that has been helping to lead the effort, I think.
Herding some of the cats.
Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome.
I think from an intro standpoint, I don't.
I think one thing, maybe Brian, if you could give a little bit of perspective as to why SCA thought it was beneficial to partner with King County and PSRC in bringing forward this conversation, this regional conversation, because I think Sound Cities has seen this as an important conversation piece.
So I think a little bit of that predated me too, but I'll do the best I can. I think there's, I'd say, 2 pieces that predominantly were kind of the impetus. One was the county did its, on the Roads and Bridges Task Force, and there was a lot of feedback from cities that there hadn't been enough engagement from cities in coming up with what was kind of identified in that effort. And then, more correctly, there was a convening of elected officials in Issaquah back at, I think it was right my second week on the job, November or so of a little over a year ago. And in that meeting, there was a lot of interest from the cities that were there at that one. That was kind of limited east side cities that didn't have broader engagement of everyone in the county. But for those who were there, identifying challenges, whether there's shared ownership of a facility or really the users of that facility are coming from multiple jurisdictions, but the cost of it is laid at the feet of whichever jurisdiction the choke point happens to be in. Those kinds of conversations around, okay, well, we know that there's this long-term funding need overall. Everyone's experiencing it, but is there a way to convene everyone together and identify some of these solutions and some shared approach to them that would make more sense than each city in the county kind of going it alone and chasing specific transportation projects and whatever the next transportation package comes out of Olympia, that sort of thing. So that was a lot of the discussion that day. So there was a commitment there to give it a go. But yeah, outside of that, I think you've described the process really well from there.
And a couple additional points to round out the information sharing. One of the questions that has been asked, at least at the technical staff level, whether Ingrid and I have attended, is the potential for a ask of the state legislature in the future to support regional infrastructure projects. And so there's been a lot of energy and effort around trying to zero in on those that have the greatest regional benefit for the region. So not necessarily every jurisdiction is represented in that conversation, or at least if they may be represented in various degrees. So some areas may get more attention in that. So as this conversation has gone on, it's been a kind of an interesting kind of thought process as to how to balance the regional interests. The other thing is that in late winter, Auburn hosted a meeting of the South King County Public Works Directors, and Brian was gracious enough to attend that and be on the hot seat, because at the technical committee level, there's been a lot of concern raised with the largesse of the need, with the difficulty in potentially building an awareness and understanding at the state legislature level, and then trying to figure out how the potential local matches that have been discussed would be addressed. So Brian came down in that vein and sat with a bunch of folks who were very skeptical, and was gracious in that meeting to listen to our concerns, which have been shared by actually all the staff from different elements of the region, not just South King County. Pretty much a consistent message of trying to really hone down on some of these large financial needs and some of the potential for getting the legislature to support the specific area of the state, perhaps not other areas of the state.
So that's kind of a broad overview of the program.
Yeah.
There's a couple things that the technical committee has done, and there's like I said, there's quite a bit of information in the packet. But one of the first things that the technical group did was to work on what is being called the Tsi Road Network. So what roads would actually be part of the discussion? Because obviously we can't fund all of our roads through this process, especially if we're doing a regional effort through the legislature. So we needed to focus in on how do we define those roads? What do those roads include? And on page 5 of your packet, you see a very, very small map that shows generally where those lines are at. However, you can't tell where anything is in that. So I actually pulled up the Auburn portion of that map. So hopefully we can see it a little bit better. And we can see what roads we're talking about there. So the colors on this map, the dark blues are kind of the principal arterioles, the federally classified roads. The darker greens are, again, federal minor arterial classified roads. That's a fairly significant portion of some of our major roads through town. We also talked about making sure that we included the T1 and T2 freight routes that every city had in there, because those are major connectors between our various jurisdictions to make sure that that roadway network is functioning. We also wanted to make sure we caught anything that's part of the national highway system that isn't actually on the federally classified roads. We also wanted to connect in there the frequent transit routes. So you'll see for us, right now, that's up in Lee Hill. We have a line in there that will be a rapid ride in Metro's Metro Connect's plan. So we wanted to make sure that we captured those types of corridors as well, so that we're improving as much of the transportation connectivity between jurisdictions as possible. And then we also included the King County arterial roadway networks, which is fairly limited. There's nearly nothing in Auburn because we're in Auburn. But it affects some of the outlying roads connectivity into Auburn from other jurisdictions. So that kind of sums up what that road network is.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Yeah.
I still don't understand.
So every colored road that's on here is what the committee, the technical group, agreed was a roadway that we should be focusing on looking at what the funding needs are regionally. So this is part of how we came to what is the need in King County. So besides just Auburn, this encompasses all of the other agencies within King County as well, that all of the roadway networks went through this process. We looked at how many of those roads were included in there. Then we looked at PSRC's T2040 funding projections and used that, the amount of roads, the amount of bridges on those roads, the amount of traffic signals on those roads, to figure out what is the preservation cost for those roadways, as well as what is the capacity improvement cost for those roadways. So what are the planned projects in T2040 for all of those roadways, and what is the preservation cost for those roadways?
So the roads that the coalition identified, does the City of Auburn engineering staff agree?
Yes, so we were part of the conversation in coming up with what those roads were. As I said, we're not going to be able to fund our local roads through a program like this or making that legislative request. So we needed to focus on what are those major roads that are connecting between jurisdictions and serving more than just Auburn or more than just Kent, but serving between those jurisdictions and providing a regional transportation network outside of just our city.
And Ingrid, what do the colors mean again?
So if you look on page 5, there's a little table right here. So the dark blue is those principal arterials that are...
Mine doesn't have colors.
That would help.
So now, you don't have color either.
No, we're all black and white.
That would have helped. I apologize for that. So principal arterials for us are mainly, actually I don't even know that they're, yeah, the only principal arterial that Auburn has in the federally classified roads that are on this network is 277th, right here. Okay. All of Auburn Way North to Auburn Way South, R Street, West Valley Highway, East Valley Highway, 15th Street across the valley up into Lee Hill Road and across Lee Hill all the way connecting to Highway 18. Those are a minor arterial, federally classified minor arterial. That may not be the same classification that our road is, but that's how it's federally classified. And then we have a couple other things in there like the freight routes. So 37th between West Valley Highway and Auburn Way is a freight route. So it doesn't fall into the federally classified roads, but it's a freight route that has been identified as T1, T2. Same thing with C Street Southwest, C Street Northwest. Those are federally or T1, T2 freight routes. The transit route, red up here, so through Lee Hill Road where we have, or Lee Hill area where we have a rapid ride planned, and then in the downtown area around the station where we have major transit use, frequent transit use. So those roadways that serve that area. And Peasley Canyon Road over here where it's actually within Auburn is also federally classified principal arterial. And the only other color that's on there is the King County arterials, which you can see is this right over here, going out into the Green River Valley area.
That makes sense.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't realize you didn't have color copies in there.
I think one of the things that, why this may be important and potentially should be important to council is because as if this conversation continues to have momentum, what you're going to see is, as Ingrid said, there's about a $18–19 billion need identified between capacity, increasing capacity, and then maintenance and preservation needs. And there's been a whole host of conversation around potential revenue sources that the local governments could engage in to offset some of those costs that would also be balanced out with potentially going to the legislature and asking for funding to support these regional needs. Well, that ends up means there's going to have to be a level priority at the legislature and a level priority at the local government. So if this continues forward, you're going to see potentially a lot of energy around going to the legislature and asking for some level of funding. And but at the same time, in the conversations, at least at the staff level, there's been a recognition that the legislature is probably going to be asking, well, what have you done at the local level? And so in the packet information, and again, not realizing it's black and white, but there is a copy of a PowerPoint presentation from November 2017, and in there it highlights the different revenue sources that could potentially be looked at. Some of them we've talked about as a city, not all of them, but they may be potential avenues to bring for local match. And then again, the legislature may be sought for some funding. I don't know that yet. But these are things that you may want to keep in mind because it's that constant balancing act of priorities and where funds go.
So what if the legislation doesn't put out any money on this? Where are we going to get the funds for this?
So it's a good question. PSRC through T2040 certainly has identified funding options that are out there, and certainly funding options that could be enacted if the legislature chose to do that. What you're looking at with the RTSI program is more about how do we go to the legislature as one voice with 39 cities and a county talking about what our overall need is without it devolving into focusing on what Kent wants for one project or what Auburn wants for one project, because that's not going to help us get the message across to the legislature of how great that need actually is. If you turn to page 6 in the packet, there's a good little chart there that shows kind of what the estimated costs are for King County for the RTSI network. So again, all the colored roads that are on the overall map throughout all the agencies in King County. And you can see that we have a need of $17 billion between now and 2040. 43% of that is based on capacity project needs. 57% of that is just based on maintenance and preservation of those roadways. And we're losing ground on that. You've heard me have that conversation before, probably a broken record at this point. And you can see on the second little stack, current law revenue. So basically what we as local agencies can already enact within King County is generating about $9.5 billion. So we have a shortfall of $7.5 billion in that funding. And how are we going to get there?
One other thing to add is that at some of the meetings there has been conversation around the fact, and this topic that's very familiar to council, is that this is also an economic development issue. The longer that these infrastructure issues are not addressed, the more the regional economy is challenged to keep up with the growth, to keep up with the transportation needs associated with that growth, to move people around, to move goods around. So there is a true economic development issue here. Just in a small microcosm of conversation, the movement between ports was discussed at one of the meetings I was at, and how difficult that's becoming in the vein of just getting from distribution facilities to the ports and from the ports out to various distribution and other facilities. So it's something to keep in mind that this is a transportation issue, it's also an economic development issue, and while not advocating an outcome on this, I think it does have to be recognized that the more challenged the regional transportation system is, the more challenging it is for the regional economy.
And you also have to remember that it's a work source or a workforce issue as well as a congestion issue, because if for some magic reason all of that funding came to fruition, can you imagine trying to get all of that work done? Where is the skilled labor going to come from to complete it, and how will people get around? How will they commute while that work is being done? So while it's great to look at how do we fund this, it's similar to what we talked about with our own funding needs within the city, is how do we do this and still allow people to get around? And where do we find the skilled labor to do it?
A scheduling nightmare,
Well, yes,
if you had the money.
if we had the money.
That's why it's an important regional conversation, because, I mean, what the mayor just had is right on. This is, it would be an immense impact to the region. It might benefit in the long run, but in the short term, it might be incredibly painful. But the challenge is that as you move to go up to talk to the legislature, individually and collectively, jurisdictions are going to be asked to play some political chips if this goes forward. And so the council needed to be aware of this, number one, and understand that if these political chips are played, it just means that there is perhaps a different tone to that conversation with other funding priorities, because this could capture not an insignificant amount of money from the state if they were to be supportive. Don't know if they will be.
As the regional group of people here from all the other cities, I assume they've done similar things like we have here.
Yeah, so this is just a portion of the map. The map is quite a bit bigger.
I'm sure. But have they tried to, in any way, shape, or form, try to prioritize any of this?
So we have not discussed because there's no specific projects that are identified in this. Right now, it was identifying what's the roadway network, so we could come from PSRC's funding scenarios with what do we think the actual cost behind that roadway network and preserving kind of that key regional roadway network outside of the state routes. How do we preserve that? How do we maintain that? How do we improve that before we get into a project priority discussion? The concern with a project priority discussion is that if your project's not on the list, you're probably not going to support the initiative. And the goal when RTSI started out was to have all 39 cities and the county going as one voice. So how do we try to coordinate that with everybody?
Yeah, I was looking at some of these funding glossaries here and some of the things. It looks like one heck of a lot of tax increases coming down the line in order to accomplish most or any of this.
Well, and keep in mind that those are a list of what are the revenue options that are out there or potential options that might be out there. A lot of those either may take legislative action. Some of them don't take legislative action. They take local action to enact. TBDs, not everybody has enacted funding through their TBDs. Not every agency has enacted a TBD. So there's still some potential funding that could come from that source that hasn't been accounted for in that $9.5 billion that's available as current law, because all that PSRC is counting in that is those TBDs that have enacted actual funding packages.
The city of Auburn has actually got our askets in there, have they not?
For TBD?
Yes.
So we do not have any funding scenario enacted for our TBD, so we are not currently included in that.
You know, having been down to Olympia for a couple of days down there, I hadn't heard any of this as far as anything coming forward for the legislators to even enlighten them.
It's not to
It's
that
not to
point,
that
no.
point yet.
I'm sure it's not, but
So this, go ahead.
I was going to say, I had a meeting with the Senate Transportation Chair, and there was no discussion of it. I mean, they aren't looking at a transportation package this year at all, probably not even next year. I think some of the impetus here was to raise the flag a little bit that, hey, if and when you do start to gear up to do a statewide transportation package, don't leave out the local roads again, because I think we've had some mega projects, regional projects, obviously SD3 and Connecting Washington, where you've got these enormous projects, but and so they sort of feel, well, we've done it, right? We've taken care of all this. Everything WashDOT came and asked us to do, we've done. It's like, no, there's this
we're just kind of getting started with
other
this.
big chunk that is.
And as a reminder, this Friday is a second meeting of the elected officials, so Mayor Backus and other representatives from around the region will be meeting to get an update, and based on looking at the agenda, we'll be asked to provide kind of guidance on next steps. And we don't know what the outcome of that guidance will be. It may not go anywhere, it may go into something, but there is some interesting regional choices in front of all of the regional communities, because this is a large issue, and as Ingrid pointed out, the numbers are daunting and will require a regional effort. Individually, you'll never overcome for some of these, so that's why the regional conversation has been happening.
I see.
Will this come up to the public sector to view or to have any input on this?
In terms of public participation?
We hadn't, there hasn't been any discussion in terms of just the RTSI. I think any solution that you're gonna pursue would ultimately legislative or local.
So I think the other thing to keep in mind is that part of this is that these technical conversations have taken time to get kind of this is a big issue to kind of corral into a thoughtful conversation. So again, going to the second meeting with the electeds on Friday is really intended to check in. The last meeting was in June of 2017, when the project had just kind of literally kicked off a few months before, and there were still a lot of questions. This is to come back with some of those questions answered and some more questions for the electeds to answer. So probably won't have a good sense of what next steps, including any public participation, until after Friday.
Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, from what I was reading in here, it appears there's some real structural issues related to funding for transportation. I think about to myself, having parked my F-150 and I'm now driving a C-Max, getting 4 times the mileage, and it just appears to me that we're going to have to make some tough choices in terms of funding. And then you add the ST3 burden that people are feeling. We really have a challenge. Can you talk about that for a moment, the funding parts of that?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. The gas tax is going to dwindle and continue to reduce. It's not going to meet the need the way that it's currently structured in Washington State. And we've seen that for a while, and that's been part of the efforts regionally and statewide to look at some other ways of doing that funding. So in that list of options that you see in the new revenues packet, one of those is the user fees. And that's basically proposed to somewhat replace the gas tax or add on to the gas tax. It depends on how they end up trying to implement it. It's going through a pilot program right now around, I believe, the Puget Sound area to see how that would work. So that's basically where you're charging drivers for how they drive and potentially where they drive, instead of doing it based upon gas usage, because cars are getting more efficient. People are using more electric vehicles, which pay nothing towards that, but they still all use the roads. They still wear the roads. So how do we try to capture what's really happening in that roadway usage? So that's one of those options, and that certainly is probably the one that would generate potentially the most funds out there and could potentially generate it the most equitably for all of the jurisdictions if you can do it based upon where people are driving. Other things that are out there, you have the indexing the existing fuel tax, the carbon tax on fuel, paid parking surcharge, which doesn't help an agency like us because we don't do paid parking in our downtown, but somebody like Seattle, that could actually help, or Tacoma, where you actually have paid parking. The vehicle license fees, that's really the transportation benefit districts. Looking at increasing the motor vehicle excise tax. Looking at the transportation impact fee. Some of those are things that we can look at. Some of those we've already kind of maximized what our fee is based upon our proposed development and our expected growth throughout our city. The county could look at a road levy lift, and then another option that has been discussed at local levels but has never really grasped onto the legislative level is the street utility tax. So basically creating an enterprise type fund like we have for our utilities for our road maintenance, and charging people based upon their property and their trip generation from their properties to pay towards the maintenance of the roads. Many of those will take legislative action in order to give us the option to even use.
It's going to be a big hit from every standpoint, I'm sure, legislative, local.
Well, I think Councilmember Brown really pointed out a good point, is that no matter how you slice this, it is going to be impactful. And if you do nothing, it's going to be impactful. If you invest in any of the tools that Ingrid just identified, it's going to be impactful. So it's, and you take it down to the microcosm of Auburn and looking at some of the things we've looked at in the past with our transportation benefit district as an example, it's going to be impactful. So it's going to be, it's a individual jurisdictional conversation and a regional conversation, but it's a tough scenario, because if you don't do anything, it's potentially going to get worse. If you do something, it's going to be painful, potentially financially. It's going to be a tough conversation to have, which I think on Friday will probably come out. At least I would expect it'll come out in the electives conversation. I think that difficulty in balancing these interests is going to come out, I think.
Sure.
We're
Well,
look-
go
We're
ahead.
looking at what comments, what your thoughts are that you might like me to share on Friday, so.
Councilmember Pelosi.
No more taxes.
Well, then you're gonna have crumbled roads.
54 million for the schools, ST3, et cetera, et cetera. That's my concern.
Agreed, that's why when you look at,
So you can tell them taxes is a concern.
Are there any options in here at all to get any grants or any money from the feds?
So a lot of the existing law, current law revenue, that is taking into account grants that, that are programmed into PSRC's funding scenario and financial plan. So basically all the federal funds that they already get and distribute is already included in that programming. So are there new grants out there? Not that I'm aware of, but if you hear of any, let me know.
The granting environment is getting increasingly tough for regions and individual communities. More and more, I think, councils and regions are going to have to accept the fact that that stream of revenue is, well, won't dry up. It's going to be incredibly challenging down the line to get, I believe, because it is, there's just not enough. I mean, the infrastructure needs throughout the nation, we're talking about $7 billion. They're talking $1 trillion.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just roads, it's across the board. So it's going to be really challenging, I think.
President's State of the Union address.
Oh, yeah.
He'll solve it for us.
He's got $1 trillion is exactly right. That's what the president has alluded to as a transportation
Yeah.
funding.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Well, President Trump is, wants to push hard infrastructure. And if that comes around, then PSRC will get undoubtedly some money for infrastructure for this region. That's one way. Implementing a carbon tax, which the governor is pushing, that's another way. And raising parking fees, you know, that's always an opportunity. We don't have any parking fees on Main Street here, but we do have parking fees in some of our lots, right?
That's just a monthly permit fee.
Yeah.
This is be a surcharge on top of, so for example, if you paid at a metered parking space, it would be a surcharge. So it's a different mechanism, funding mechanism.
Yeah. And then, of course, impact fees. We look at that every year. And we just went through that recently.
Leave no stone unturned.
But you're getting to your point of, you said no taxes. Most of these things either say tax or fees on them.
There ain't no free lunch.
That's true.
This is really, as the mayor said, this is really to help her in the conversation on Friday with the other electeds as they get these lightning round questions posed to them, where they have a minute or so to express their opinions and thoughts and ideas. So hopefully we've given you enough information that you can share with her your thoughts.
Looks like you've done a great job of pulling all this information together as an initiative. And every one of these options here have viability, but again, it's going to be taxing everybody out of existence here if we're not careful. And we talked about the $20 car tabs for our city, and I think we're going to be looking at that and then some again. So we're not finished with this by any means.
That's
But
why I need your
I
input.
don't know what to arm you with any more information than
I have one
is already here.
I have one other comment.
Yes, Bill.
And that's, right now, the fuel tax, we're looking at road usage charge. I mean, and our pilot, I think, is starting up for the state, is what we heard the other day.
Pay per mile kind of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah. And Oregon has a pilot, so I think that getting the Washington State pilot in place as soon as possible will give us some more information.
Well, I think the reality is that we all know the gas tax isn't going to continue to work, so we have to find a replacement. And is that the pay per mile? What kind of user fee does that look like? So whether it's the current one that the pilot program is based on, or whether it's a modified one, I think you'll eventually see that happen. But that's not going to happen by next year or the year after that. And that's going to take time to implement.
And you don't want to make it iterative on top of the gas tax. It would
Right.
have to be in place of.
Yes.
Right.
One of the tools that Ingrid referred to that has been a topic of conversation, I think, for 20, 25 years is the issue of street maintenance utility. And really what that is a local control issue. It would be legislation that would need to be passed by the Washington State Legislature to allow for local governments to have the ability to engage in a local control conversation with their citizens to see if they wanted to. Yes, it would be a tax, and the citizens would have to decide that. It would be a voted on action by the citizens. But it is a tool that, at least on the maintenance side, it's an unfortunate thing that that conversation has never gone anywhere, because at least the electeds and the citizens could have a conversation about what's best for their community. I think it's one of those unfortunate tools that's not available, because and Auburn over the years has led the charge in pushing for that idea, at least for the idea of having local control to talk to your citizens about that. And it hasn't happened yet, but I think it's one of those tools that could be beneficial at the local or city level as well as the regional level.
Yes.
That's why I asked if this was going to be brought up to the public, so that way the public can have an input instead of having it on the council to decide. This way, they're making a decision.
Well, that's one tool where, at least as the legislation has been discussed in the past, it is a local control issue, and the versions that have come out in the past would require a voted on action by the citizens. As Ingrid said, not all of these potential tools have that, but some of them do.
Yes, Mayor.
And it's definitely not to the point yet of taking this out for public comment, because we don't even know what we would be bringing them. But that's why I need to know what you want me to share on Friday as far as Auburn's current position on how do we move forward. Are these the right projects to be looking at? You can see what the
Not
questions are.
necessarily projects, but corridors.
But corridors, sorry, yes. But you see what the questions are on there. What other steps do you believe are necessary at this point? And what thoughts and ideas do you have about potential revenue sources? So those items are, well, actually they changed it.
Yeah, they
Is a
modified
presented
the question.
information a clear description of the regional road network transportation needs? Please explain your response. And how do the presented regional road network transportation needs relate to priorities within your jurisdiction? So these are, we had a voice at the table, so we were able to include our priorities. So it's not in conflict therewith. But, the other question of, is the information a clear description? And then really, what do you want me to share as far as, is the city of Auburn supportive of continuing to move forward and look at this? Is Auburn not interested in this discussion? Gotta know.
Councilmember Brown.
I don't think that we have a choice as far as if we want this city to continue to grow and prosper and maintain jobs and then attract new business. I don't see how we have a choice but to try to explore this approach. We don't have a piece of ST3 really for our community, so I think it's even more important to us.
Well, we do have ST3 benefits.
Well, I should have said Link Light Rail. We don't have that part of it.
Well, it goes without saying that I think our city, thanks to Ingrid and Kevin, have done a great job in keeping us informed about what we need to do and what's coming up. And we're doing our things of trying to preserve what roads we have and try to get them up to the proper percentage that they should be. So I think we as a city are moving in the right direction, and we're showing that we're progressing that way. Funding being what it is. So I think that, you know, we're supportive of this. I would think so. We gotta look at this thing not only from our city but regionally as well.
Yeah, and we tried to focus on, for picking these road networks, is making sure that, are these the roads that we are seeing the cut-through traffic that are driving through Auburn because they're not using the highway system, because the highway system is starting to fail. We wanted to make sure we were catching all of those major roads that are making those connections through our city that people are using and going quite a ways out of their way to use because it's faster than taking the freeway, or at least it feels like they're actually making progress instead of sitting on the freeway. So from that standpoint, I believe that we have all those major roads kind of covered in what the network is. So that's why we were comfortable with kind of that network. So it's
Just
really
send some of these other people down West Valley Highway or down 2nd Street, and that would be the experience that they'll take notice on real quick. Are there any other questions for the panel? I would like to say one thing here. Now that we've heard that Kevin is going to be leaving us on Friday, it'll be his last day. And he's heading for the Sunshine State of California. And I want to thank you from my standpoint, and I'm sure on behalf of the council here, all the good work that you've done for us over the years.
Appreciate that.
Many,
Thank you.
many thanks.
It's been my honor.
And best
Thank
of
you.
luck to you in your new capacity.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, we're going to get involved with the Human Services Committee here with the ordinance number 6676, which is item B on the agenda modification.
Good evening, City
Hello.
Council, Mayor, Dana Hinman, Director of Administration. And I did ask for just a little bit of your time tonight for some clarification on the topics we discussed last week on the human services issues around the size of the committee and also the priorities that we had discussed. Our staff just needed a little bit more clarity as to what our path forward is, what the directive from the council is. And then I also wanted to provide you with the annual report from our consulting team that works on our state and federal issues, as their contract will be coming up for renewal next week. And we always like to provide you with the return on investment for the work that they are doing on our behalf each and every day. So regarding the ordinance on increasing the numbers on the Human Services Committee, it's my understanding that there was needed for some extra discussion on that, and if in fact we should or should not bring that ordinance forward next week for approval to the City Council, or if there was more discussion to be had. Then
Anybody have any other concerns?
on bringing forward the ordinance next week for vote? Okay, so I'll give them a yes, and we've provided, Dan was Johnny on the spot getting the ordinance put together for us. So that ordinance, as you can see in your packet, is ready to go. So you will be seeing that next week. And then regarding the priorities, the funding priorities question, there were the discussed priorities that we had discussed with Councilmember Trout and Councilmember Wales on some suggested changes in those priorities, as well as kind of merging those with the priorities that the Human Services Committee had been have been discussing and working on as well. I have to say, in meetings with staff, today they've done some outstanding legwork on the big mystery of where did the current priorities come from. And it was discovered, although we have not unearthed the actual document, that back in 1990 there was a social services funding guidebook, if you would call it, that the city council back then had put together, and it had been vetted through numerous community stakeholders at the time, went through the Chamber of Commerce, went through, I think, maybe some citizen groups and things like that, and this guidebook, if you will, was created. If we do unearth that treasured document, maybe it's at the museum, I don't know. We can't find it, but we have been able to dig down a little bit as to where those actual funding priorities likely were birthed, and it looks like it was clear back in 1990. So I guess, again, asking for a little bit of guidance is to bring forward a resolution next week that does contain the change in funding priorities for this current funding cycle. And I'm not sure if you recalled the ask from our staff is that we have to have our supplemental questions into the county, because we all open up our grants at the same time by February 23rd or something like that. So we would need, if we want it for this upcoming funding cycle, we would need to vote on that next week.
Could you enlighten us, Dana, as to what some of these changes in the priorities that came out of these different meetings?
I might have to defer to, I don't have them in front of me.
I don't remember.
I can see what I can.
You
I'll
can.
run up to my office and get the copy from last week.
But there was a desire to kind of update more towards the needs of the community, perhaps looking at grants that fund organizations that work on more preventative measures around some of the human services needs that we have in our community, some more direct appropriation towards the homelessness issues, and
Food bank was one of the priorities on there.
yeah, food insecurities and things like, yes.
Came first and last month, or something like that.
The committee kind of agreed on all of these changes?
Well, that's what was presented to you as council last week, was what we had sort of culled through and came up with after conversations with Councilmember Trout and Councilmember Wales on what those priorities might look like if council were to agree, and the mayor is feverishly.
Do you have it handy?
It's just, yes, it's right on my desk. I could run up and get it.
I bet I'm faster. I have it on my desk too. I'll be right back.
Yeah, because I don't have it.
My,
Yes, John?
yes, Chair, my concern is if we don't act on it next week, that'll be 2 more weeks down the road, and we would miss this grant funding cycle.
I was just wondering if there were any other changes from the time that we had seen it at a study session.
Which was last week.
It was
and
last week.
No, there haven't, my understanding, there haven't been any changes.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood then. I thought there had been some.
She just wants to know whether it wants to go forward.
We added just one thing that the young lady that left us, she really wanted that to be put on the top of the list, and I
So
can't-
here's, human services funds are 1% of the general funds that go to the biennial competitive human services funding. Funds are awarded to programs of nonprofit organizations, not the entire organization. So the funds must benefit Auburn residents and have to align with the city's areas of focus, which include poverty reduction, child abuse and neglect, domestic violence and sexual assault, and health care. That was what was in in last week's packet. Did those
Yeah,
sound right to you?
right.
So poverty reduction, child abuse and neglect, domestic violence and sexual assault, and health care. Now, I do believe.
There was the food bank included in that as well.
Well, so this is what it currently is, and I do believe that they handed out an additional
Okay.
document last week that showed what other cities around us had as priorities.
Yes.
Right.
And so I think there was some changes in the language. This is what we currently have. But I do believe that Dana and Joy handed out another document that shows what the potential changes were, just to a little bit of the verbiage, I believe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just under the impression that there might have been some additional changes in what we had kind of discussed at the last meeting. Okay.
So Bob, I'm a little confused. Why is this being discussed tonight if we made the decision last week?
There was confusion. There was so much discussion going on. There wasn't clear understanding of whether you wanted these things brought forward at next week's council meeting or if you wanted to focus more attention on them. So Dana just wanted to get clear direction on bringing everything forward next week.
Okay. So, as you know, we have 4 priorities right now: child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, sexual assault, healthcare, and poverty reduction. So all of our organizations that apply for funding, human services funding, must fit into one of those 4 categories and must provide services to Auburn residents. And the feedback we received was that we wanted to look at, let me see, where's the slide? Here we go. The proposal was to look at kind of 3 main categories: one on homelessness prevention and housing stability. And those could be things like rental assistance and prevention of homelessness, eviction prevention, shelters and navigation services, and domestic violence supports, food access, where we might look at programs that provide emergency food programs and meal programs, food delivery programs such as Meals on Wheels, and healthcare. Underfunded programs such as dental services, mental health, chemical dependency, senior health access. And that is what came out of the meetings and the work with Councilmember Trout and Councilmember Wales. The Human Services Committee also has some things that they have been discussing and looking at as they have surveyed the need in our community, and everyone agrees that an update is certainly necessary. But as the mayor said, do you feel like you have enough information going forward on this to bring it forward for this next funding cycle, or do we stay with the 4 priorities we currently have, and then the next 2-year funding cycle look to incorporate these new proposals?
I thought that we had agreed that night to go ahead and put all of those together for this biennial.
The 4 or the 3?
The 4.
So to keep what we currently have: poverty reduction, child abuse and neglect, domestic violence and sexual assault, and health care. Because there was also some talk of just putting it into those 3 categories and leaving it that way.
The
That's
updated priorities.
why we were unclear.
Now, I just want to make it clear as to what changes, if any, that might have been made since we had our last study session before we go to the actual council meeting where we vote on it. And
to this point, there have been no changes.
okay, so we still have the 4, right?
We're still operating when, and we would, unless otherwise directed by resolution, to.
So I guess we're ready to roll.
With maintaining the 4.
The 4.
Let's
Yes.
make sure, okay.
Maintaining the 4, no change to the 4 for
Everybody
this
concur with
funding
that?
cycle,
Concur.
and then look at continued updates so we want to take a deeper dive into what the priorities would be. So this is going to be continued work with, so we'll have staff plug in more meetings and work through the priorities
That's good.
Thank you. That will make things much easier. And then I don't know if you probably didn't have much of a chance to look over the annual report from our legislative consultants, and you know, they've done unbelievable work throughout this last year, and since I've been working with them, the change in the federal administration made them it was more imperative, I think, that we have some very qualified, well-known people, knowing staff, knowing who we can go to when we need assistance on certain things. One thing that's not highlighted in this annual report, because it's really just an ongoing thing that started probably even at least 3 years ago, if not longer, was the GSA property. I don't really think that we talk enough about how important it is for us to keep our finger on the pulse of that federal property. It could have easily been lost, especially in the change of administration last year at the federal level. There was a lot of staffing changes at GSA that went out with the old administration that many of us had been working with for a very long time. And we have been able to really make a seamless transition at the federal level with our consultants. And most of you were able to work a bit with Mike again with AWC Action Days and have a pretty good idea of how great he is and working with our issues.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes, I just would tell my fellow council members that I've worked with the Thompson Consulting Group for years, and I know them to be just top-notch. They're very professional, well-connected, know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Councilmember Pelosi.
I agree with what you're saying. However, I don't really feel that this report covers deliverables in a form that reflects the dollars brought to the city. I would like to see number of meetings that they have advocated on the City of Auburn's behalf. And that could be in bullet form. It says, who did they visit in Washington, D.C., in Olympia? They have a lot of verbiage here, no question about it. But and let me ask you this, what are we paying them a year?
The contract for both consulting firms, because they work concurrently, is $250,000 a year, I think.
Okay.
That's the line
I
item.
mean, all I'm looking for is a simple bulleted, those simple things that the taxpayer can understand. I don't understand all this stuff myself. It's a lot of verbiage.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. But I'd like to see, as an example, we visited so-and-so, we visited X, and we talked about X. And as a result of that, we have advocated X dollars for the city of Auburn.
So some of those things will be ongoing and they won't be able
Sure.
to be
I understand that.
quantified.
Yeah, but a lot of things they can quantify. And I think we need more meat and potatoes in this report.
Councilmember Holman.
To my colleague, I know what you're saying, but remember when we tried to put together the economic benefit we gained from NLC, your and I membership in NLC, and how difficult it was for us to put a dollar value on that. In fact, we never did succeed in doing that. So what do we bring back to Auburn for our membership in NLC, which is another form of lobbying on the federal level. And we were unable to come up with a dollar value on that because so many of the things were multi-year, just building the relationship with staff and legislators to be able to move forward. And how do you put a dollar figure on that?
Some of them you can't. I agree with you.
You know, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not in opposition.
No, I
just,
understand that. And hey, I know that XXX equals something and that may not be a dollar sign. But it can be explained that maybe in a positive sense or even in a negative sense, hey, we're not going to get anywhere on this. And I understand that we're going to have to spend money on some of these things, but we aren't going to get any gain. That's the way it is. But as an example, the YMCA, the Nexus, did they have anything to do with that?
Yes.
Okay, then let's say that.
Right, yeah. There are some things that do have real dollar values in it that can show.
We should get credit. And then we, as council, when someone comes up to me, us, so what are we getting? And, you know, we do have some of those folks in town that ask those type of questions. And that way, I can pop up and say, hey, we're getting a good dollar value.
Yeah.
You're just looking for more detail.
Yeah. I don't want...
Where it's applicable.
I do not want motherhood, if you know what I mean, or verbiage. Give me some facts, ma'am.
Will do.
That's all.
Would you like that as a white paper circulated, or would you like that to come with
Contract renewal.
with the renewal?
Say what?
Would you like that just as a white paper to be circulated sometime this week, or would you like it to be attached to the contract renewal next week?
That would be good.
Okay,
White
got it.
paper to be-
To the contract renewal.
You bet.
Yep, perfect.
Okay,
Thank you.
Good point.
thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion items? New business? Matrix, I don't see anything on the matrix. I think that's probably still in work.
Yeah. We could say something about our Dennis coming to town
Or what?
on our
Service line agreement?
service line. Yeah. We have made, you want me to talk about that?
We can.
I mean, just as a briefing for the
Sure.
council. We have, the mayor and deputy mayor have talked about putting the service line subject on a future study session. And
Good.
so we bantered back different dates, and so we've settled with the 26th of March for him to come from Pittsburgh and give his presentation. And he's all excited.
I feel sorry for them. There are no direct flights from Pittsburgh.
No. Yeah. So anyway, we got it all. He's all happy, and so Deputy Mayor will make sure it gets on the, well, we'll be talking about the matrix. So anyway, that's the latest. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay, being no other items before the council, I would say we adjourn.